Everybody find a mic and get ready to start here. As I've been reflecting on this afternoon and listening to the last several conversations and thinking about our topic in general, I think that there's going to be some redundancy, but I don't think that that should really have a limitation on our discussion. So why don't we start by just going through some basic introductions and then really focusing in on some of the core issues that you're faced with right now, and then let's start to unpack some of the ways that we might be able to look at resolution for that. So just from an introductory standpoint, my name is Dan Johnson. I'm really the sales director and lead for public sector for Oracle Construction Engineering General Business Unit. What that really means is my job is to figure out what our customer needs are and determine whether we have alignment or in fact we can partner them with somebody that can help them achieve the outcomes that they expect organizationally. And so my role here today, very simply, is to listen and understand what those issues are, and let's see if we can drill into how to perpetuate some of those outcomes. And why don't we just go ahead and, Rachel, why don't you get us started here?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Rachel Barlock. I'm a water resources engineer with the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, which is the Detroit area MPO, the 7 counties in Southeast Michigan. And I will try to be succinct. I think one of the major issues that we're seeing is that we have a need of about $3 billion annually for our water systems just in the region to get all of our water pipes, drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, to good or fair condition. And even with the Infrastructure Jobs Act money, that's not enough. And we don't have a dedicated stormwater funding source in Michigan. It was ruled unconstitutional about a decade ago by the Michigan Supreme Court. So trying to find that funding and be able to leverage transportation funding with infrastructure coordination, things like that, those are some of the major challenges we're facing.
Correct. Mohammed?
My name is Mohammed Atiyah Ibrahim. I work for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in the Office of Research and Development, specifically in the Center for Environmental Solution and Emergency Response, or CESAR. I'm based in Cincinnati, but just trying to link myself to Chicago. I used to work for Northwestern before being recruited by the U.S. EPA. So I used to live here, beautiful city. What I do is try to find what we call innovative technologies for emerging contaminants. So emerging contaminants can be 2 things. One is new chemicals that being produced and they found their way to the environment, and we find them toxic or harmful. And the other type is chemicals that they used to be there, but we didn't have the analytical tools to see them. So now we are discovering that they are actually in our environment. So when thinking about infrastructure-wise, if we want to innovate our water treatment technologies, we need to rethink, like forward thinking, that our existing infrastructure is failing. If you find pollutant in your drinking water, this means like it passed through the whole treatment plant and it reached to the tap or faucet that you found it there. So if we think about innovative treatment technology, something that out of the box, it's not part of the existing treatment plan, then how to implement that, how to integrate it to the existing infrastructure. So what always come to mind when people reach out to me and say like, okay, we need to find something new, and then we propose something, then the debate would be, okay, how to implement it and how much it would be, the cost for that. So yeah, we can take the discussion from there, but this is basically how things rotate around my work.
Thank you. Brian.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Brian Kadame. I'm a management analyst with the Village of Schaumburg here in Illinois. I'm a former engineer from the private sector as well. I would probably mimic my 2 colleagues here in that our biggest issues really do resolve around infrastructure. So as local government, one of the things we're really concerned about is non-revenue water. We're obviously paying for a whole lot more water than we're actually selling out to our constituents. We tend to shift between 10 and 15% non-revenue water, and state mandate is if you're using Lake Michigan water, we're to get down to 10% or below. So we are, trying to do our best to meet those targets, not just to meet state regulations, but also to be good stewards of the lake as well. And additionally, we also look at, maintaining and trying to plan for future windfalls of infrastructure replacement. We're a little bit lucky in that, a lot of our infrastructure was built in the 60s and 70s, but when looking out, maybe 15 years down the line, we're going to all of a sudden hit probably 30% of our system is going to become due for replacement all at once. So now we're starting to try to think about how can we start taking action now to better prioritize what will need replacement, so that way when that windfall does come, we're prepared for it.
Excellent. So really, as the three of you have really been discussing here, I've kind of heard four things. There's how do I fund so I can actually implement solutions to the problems we have. Secondarily, there was, just that whole element of quality. Understanding what the issues of quality may or may not be from the sources that are available to us that we're consuming at this point in time. The third, I think, is the most obvious, which is infrastructure. Taking old infrastructure, even identifying where that old infrastructure is, being able to pull it forward and modernize. And then I think the last thing that I've heard, although it wasn't specific overall, was kind of in source. So, Brian, when I think about it, you guys are sourcing from Lake Michigan, and in essence, that has an impact or a direct impact on funding or rates that allow you a limitation on some of the other things that you can do or would like to do in support of the constituents. So one of the questions I would have is, how's your organization approaching various funding sources to be able to offset that so that you can, in effect, impact the infrastructure and continue to deliver the high quality to your constituents that you're looking for?
So one of the things we do is we try to reach out to all of our contacts as much as possible. We try to utilize state and federal funding as much as possible. And we also separate all of our water funding out from any of other capital improvement projects. So anything that our ratepayers are paying for water system is only going to be used for water projects. So that kind of helps a little bit in terms of we don't have to worry about funds getting taken away for transportation or streets projects. But it is always an issue trying to figure out. I think we're right now replacing less than 1% of our water system every year. And we need to start increasing that too. So I think water rates is going to be the biggest portion of that. And as much as I, love saving water and, try to tell everybody to install low flow fixtures and everything, that's something for municipalities also a little challenging because we do pass through rates from the city of Chicago. We have to put our own rates on top of that for our own pumping infrastructure, but we have to deal with the whims of political climates. We might not always want to raise rates when other people are raising rates as well. And as well as now that our residents are using less water, we've built out all this infrastructure for, let's say, 8 MGD peak demand, but now all of a sudden our peak demand is dropping down to 6 MGD, but we've got all this extra infrastructure that we haven't used. So I think not only just looking for outside funding sources, we're trying to engage other consultants for how we can better plan for the future infrastructure changes.
Awesome. And Rachel, you had mentioned that using, I'm going to just call it infrastructure, but do you find that there will be available funding from the infrastructure bill as it relates to how you generate funding, which I think is almost through like infrastructure for the DOT? There is some allotted to water reclamation districts, just as there is some to airports.
Yes, absolutely. So there is, of course, we're happy that money is coming from that infrastructure bill. It's just not enough. We did an analysis in the past couple of years to try to figure out, like you said earlier, what is in the ground, what condition is it in, and how do we improve that? What do we need to do? And the investment need is just so large. but rates don't necessarily cover that because we're not charging the true cost of service. And of course, politicians don't want to say, I'm increasing the water rates because it's better for the system, but then that becomes an affordability issue. So it's this loop. I don't know that I answered your question, but there is money coming, and it's trying to leverage the limited available funding and kind of collaborating with other infrastructure sectors. So utilizing the transportation funding, which is what the MPO kind of gets funded through, if we can do a transportation project when we do water projects, trying to overlap and save costs there, that's a big thing that we're pushing from the regions. And then, of course, I didn't say this, but the region doesn't own any infrastructure. This is kind of what we're trying to do to help the communities in the 7 counties. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, so
okay.
in doing that, so you're patterning your approach based on other projects which are going to be effectual into the infrastructure that's there, allowing you a chance to modernize. So your prioritization then is based off a prioritization really that could be coming from some other facility, but then that has an impact to be able to help you manage to deliver more over time.
Totally, yes. There's project prioritization that happens, in the individual sectors, but then what we're trying to do is come up with a capital improvement kind of project coordination tool, a map, I guess, basically, where there's transportation projects that are coming that are funded that need to happen through the state, through the local governments. And then if we could get people to start thinking kind of 5, 10, 15 years out, we can start to overlap those projects and time them and budget them to maximize the available funding.
So in one of the presentations earlier, I think it was Wes actually, was talking about, the biogas and the ability to bring technology to the forefront from a project standpoint where it becomes a revenue generation to offset the growth of that technology. Have you or any of you, been evaluating that as a source of funding overall to be able to step in and maybe separate that gap? So like in your case where the gap is such that you're tied to the infrastructure bill, but you're going to take 3 to 10 years in essence to get to a modernization that's really impactful to your constituents. Has there been any thought then about finding revenue sources that are, I guess are byproducts of the projects that you're going after?
I guess finding revenue sources. First, I want to say that the infrastructure bill funding, I didn't say this earlier, is coming through our state revolving loan process. So it's still going to be a loan, which many communities can't even afford to do the match on. So it's not as available as maybe it seems like it is, at least in our state. So trying to find the additional revenue, I think, is really just going to be leveraging the other projects, the other sectors, private partnerships, things like that. If you're putting in broadband or you're working with the private electric companies, kind of going in on the projects together. I'm speaking a lot. Does anyone else have anything?
No, it's just like people expect that if I'm working for the EPA, then I'll be giving away money. Especially like I had a lot of friends from academia, and like I'm moving to the EPA, so I'm like, yeah, that's good. So you should giving. But I'm in the ORD, Office of Research and Development, so we expect the money to come to us also through the Congress. So it's not readily available. We compete internally to get project funded, but we have also the access to other federal agencies. Like a couple of my projects is through with DOD. Like we find mutual benefit in some emerging contaminants that they happen to be one of the source polluters, like PFAS and stuff like that. That we ask that they should also fund part of our work. So seeking out money, I wouldn't say companies, not that common because our nature as government, but from other government agencies, it's common practice internally with the Office of Research and Development, yes.
I don't really have no comment on that because we're luckily just a water system, but I will pose a question back to you, Mohaz, just if instead of maybe looking for an external, like private company, is there ways that maybe cities or local government like myself can partner with the EPA for projects and maybe split that funding?
Yeah, it happens. Anything like intergovernment agreements is encouraged because it's much easier to establish. That's why I said like with companies, like there might be like conflict of interest and a lot of questions that would be raised. But anything with government to government agency, we do it. I do it with NASA, I do it with DOD, with the state, like with Cincinnati, I am based there now. We have some common projects. So yeah, we do that.
Well, changing the topic just a little bit, I want to go into the thought process of quality. And one of the questions I was thinking about is there anything relative to best practices to securing data to assure quality standards?
So for us, we do rigorous testing of all of our well sites. And before it was all on paper form, so we're luckily, we now have CityWorks for our asset management system, and we push all of our data into that, and that's helped tremendously moving from paper forms to something digital, because now we've got, audit logs of who's recording that information. It's not also on the operator to remember, I need to check the chlorinators or, any of the other kind of chemical injectors. Now we've got work orders generating, on a weekly and a monthly basis for them to go forward and check it themselves. And then just having those data logs are very beneficial because now we can compare them to what other towns are doing and our other cities. So just moving digital has been the biggest benefit for us.
Data quality, with EPA, we establish method, we validate them, and we publish them, and people literally just follow that. So I would claim that we have very good practice.
Fair enough. Go ahead.
From our perspective, we were able to set up, so most of the drinking water in the Southeast Michigan region comes from Lake Huron to Lake Erie, the corridor there. There's 14 drinking water treatment plants along there. It serves about 4 million people. And we established a source water monitoring program. So each of the plants along that corridor has water intake monitoring. So before it even gets to the treatment plant, and they monitor for common parameters. But what we found is it's been helpful to have that network because it's real time and they can all communicate with each other. So if upstream there's an oil spill or a heavy rain event that causes a lot of sediment, or even an E. coli, like a sanitary sewer overflow, and there's high E. coli, the downstream plants can either shut down an intake if it's a contaminant like oil, or the public health department can close down beaches if they see E. coli is coming. So that's kind of a really cool program. It's not required because it's before the treatment process, but it's been really beneficial for the region.
So another question I was thinking about is it seems that we don't necessarily have water source issues per se coming out of the Great Lakes and the Great Lake regions like we do see on the West Coast. But are there things that are creating limitations or sourcing concerns overall? Right now, I think towns that are connected to Lake Michigan have the benefit of that Lake Michigan water. But once you really start going a little bit west, like Joliet just had a lot of issues with reservoirs running dry. And we're actually seeing that a lot, kind of going, I guess, middle central Illinois and extending outwards from Lake Michigan. So some of the concerns that we have is there's that set allocation from Lake Michigan, which again is pushing to that 10%. We're seeing more towns now wanting to pipe to Lake Michigan and to Department of Water Management, some of the other, I guess, water producers, in order to kind of cover the lack of reservoir water that they're now encountering. So I think there is a concern from our planning perspective of, now we're going to be having more people pulling from the same source. Is there going to be enough in terms of that allocation to provide from everyone? So we're now seeing a lot more communication about who's doing what in terms of like non-revenue water. So that way we could try to ensure that we can push more water to those towns in need. But I think, we are going to start seeing some concerns here in the Great Lakes regions as well for more people trying to draw from that. And so is there, as I listen to that, what sourcing, we can build in the reservoirs, but what other sourcing is available to us at this point?
That's a good question. I know we have some groundwaters for emergency. I know some of the towns near us. I'm a little bit farther west from Schaumburg and Bartlett, and we look at some of the rivers as alternate sources as well. But I think we'll still be encountering some of the similar issues that if we draw too much, we'll be really pulling those down. And we also have a lot of wastewater discharge into those same rivers. So now we have to really make sure that the wastewater plants are operating efficiently, so that way they're not, polluting where we're pulling water from as well. So I think, it's a good question I don't really have an answer to, because I think that's something we're still trying to figure out.
And Rachel, how are you addressing that within your regions?
I guess I don't know that that has been something that has been discussed. I know that in more rural parts of the region, we do have well and septic systems, so it's not all public water infrastructure, and getting, making sure that there's a septic code in the state, things like that, so that's not contaminating the well water that's happening. But a majority of the region pulls from the Huron to Erie corridor. There is down, I guess, in the downstream areas, algal bloom issues. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with what happened in Ohio a handful of years ago, but there was a huge algal bloom and they lost their source, for a time. So that's something that we haven't, I guess, gotten into yet. What would happen if that source is unavailable?
Is there anything going on from an infrastructure standpoint where you are currently experiencing just direct failures? So there is a need, right, to improve the infrastructure. There's a need for those transport improvements and delivery improvements, the entire infrastructure base and the technology associated to it. But are you finding failure points at this point in time from what I'm just going to say is the older infrastructure that you have, or is it still holding and we're just planning, as it moves forward?
We're experiencing direct failures because of the heavier and more intense rain events that we're getting. So the systems are just overwhelmed. We've had pretty severe flooding last summer, and in the past, declared federal disasters, our depressed freeways are completely full of water. And it's many different parts of different systems that are causing issues. But one thing to note is in Michigan, we have stricter standards for sanitary sewer overflows than the EPA does. So the EPA allows 4 per year, and that's diluted water with the combined sewer system, allowing a little bit of an overflow. But then because Michigan is more strict, it's backing up into people's basements and into the streets and causing issues there. So figuring out how to meet the standards or get Michigan to go to the less stringent, I guess, federal standard. But then also understanding that our systems are really old and some of our pipes are failing, and should we be separating systems? Should we be increasing capacity? There's pump station failures. There are direct failures, I guess, in short answer to your question.
Brian?
We're seeing direct failures too. It's not terrible, I think, for a system our age, but, we're about 360 miles of public and private pipe, and we're about 45 to 50 main breaks a year. And I really think where that's impacting is because we have a set amount of funding for infrastructure improvements. When we start seeing these main breaks, it pulls away from other funds. So now we're starting to add to the list of hydrants that aren't getting fixed, to water valves that aren't getting exercised or fixed there, and those will cause issues further down the line as well. So anything we can do to kind of attack the point failures with the main breaks helps us elsewhere by allowing us to divert funds to other replacements.
Criticality. Yeah. There we go. The criticality of an asset management approach, I think, right?
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
Good. So we only have just a couple of minutes left. And I think what I'd like to do with the few minutes that are left are to say, we've talked a little bit about funding. We've talked a little bit about quality. We've got the infrastructure. We've had the infrastructure failure, a little bit about sourcing. And in essence, I think we've identified the fact that there's real problems with real issues, and they don't necessarily have solutions yet, right? We plug through them every day, and we may address them because we absolutely have to. It's just that catastrophic moment. But there's also that basis that says, you know, what we do, why we're here, is to actually deliver that value to our constituents today and tomorrow with consistency over time. And so I guess my thing is, how would you look at, right, if money isn't the issue, if we could remove funding, how would we or you step forward into just addressing these issues and bringing resolution overall?
I can claim that this is a common statement, like, you don't need to worry about money, even though I need to worry about it. But I think data, accessibility, collaboration with different sectors, it's not only about money, as you said it. There are so many factors that contribute to the failure that we are facing. So it just like needs that people come together and agree that we need to solve that. There is no silver bullet. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. So the data will be the core. If we identify the needs for each specific location in arid region, you would be solving the water shortage and water quality in a different way than how we do it here in the Midwest, right? So without that, we don't have that much. I mean, giving an example, like, again, I'm dealing with these emerging contaminants, specifically with PFAS. If you hear about it, it's all over the news. Teflon-related issues, just giving you some keywords. So it is there for decades, but recently it just came to the attention to the mainstream media, and now with EPA's putting like very, very strict health advisory level with potential within the couple next year or the year after, there might be some regulations. Only then the treatment plants and facilities started reaching out to us. Okay, test our water. Before that, we were reaching out to them, and then like they said, no, we are not interested. So we didn't learn, even though we had the chance. Like we could have learned over the past many years, but we didn't have access. So without data, I think it will be very hard still, even if you have money.
I think I would mimic that as well. I mean, obviously, if we had enough funding, we'd fix all our infrastructure and add all the latest technology. But I think one of the big things there was we were addressing non-revenue water. The hardest thing was to figure out what other communities were doing, and involved a whole lot of internet research. And there's really not a lot of like case studies or white papers for people that have done pilot programs. I did see like one out of California, but it didn't quite fit. But there's actually been a lot of pilot programs here in Northern Illinois that sort of matched what we were doing, but we didn't find out about that until very late into the process. And then we had to like scramble to go and meet with them, and it was all through word of mouth. So I think, you know, if I had a whole lot of extra money, I would, you know, try to spend it on developing resources that would, you know, really disseminate what other towns are doing and how they're addressing these issues.
And I think to echo infrastructure coordination across the sectors, I think I may not remember the right name. I think it was Anna in the climate resiliency panel earlier said, climate resiliency means to me every sector and industry and agency has a different priority. So infrastructure coordination to, you know, a private electric company might be different than the transportation. So when I say infrastructure, some people think bridges and roads. I think water underground. So infrastructure coordination, making sure that we're all on the same page. You know, even if we had enough money to replace all of the stormwater infrastructure, like John said in the USGS, from USGS, we are not thinking about climate projections right now. So the standards are still looking at historic data with NOAA Atlas 14. So there's just so many moving parts and so many focus areas. You know, we can only get so much done in a day, but I think starting with an asset management approach that encompasses kind of all infrastructure types is the way to go.
Thank you. Thank you all, Rachel, Mohammed, Brian. Appreciate your candor and your insights.
Thank you.